They say every family has secrets, but I never thought mine would be broadcast in high definition. It started on a Wednesday morning halfway through a board meeting in downtown Chicago. The room smelled of coffee and ambition, the kind of place where people measure worth in numbers and silence. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. At first I ignored it until my assistant leaned over and whispered, "Your sister's name is trending." I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity is cruel. I opened Instagram, and there it was, the first photo. White roses, chandeliers dripping with light champagne glasses lined in gold. A caption read, "The wedding of the year. Sophie and Ethan's perfect day. My sister in a designer gown worth more than most people's cars, smiling like she'd just conquered the world." I scrolled further, my mother laughing beside her. My cousins, the neighbors from our old street college friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Even our childhood babysitter. Every name tagged, every face glowing. Everyone except me. For a second I told myself it was an oversight. But then I saw the comment that changed everything. Someone wrote, "Isn't her sister supposed to be helping? She's always been the maid of the family." The word burned. Maid. I stared at the photo again, at the glittering ballroom I recognized all too well. The same place I used to manage before I owned it. They'd built their fairy tale on my silence. But this time, silence was about to speak. I was halfway through a board meeting when my phone lit up with a flood of notifications. At first I ignored them. But when my assistant whispered that my sister's name was trending, something in me tightened. I opened Instagram. The first post was a photo of white roses and crystal chandeliers captioned with hearts, and the words, "Sophie and Ethan's perfect day." My sister in a designer gown smiling like she owned the world. The comments were full of congratulations from family friends, even people I hadn't seen in years. I scrolled down. Everyone was tagged except me. For a moment I just stared. I tried to tell myself it was an oversight, a social media glitch, but the more I scrolled, the clearer it became. Every cousin, every old neighbor, every childhood friend was listed. My name wasn't there. Not once. The air in the conference room felt suddenly too tight. I excused myself and walked out, my heels clicking against the marble hallway of the Chicago office. In the elevator I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice already sharp. "Emily, don't start. Start what I said. Why wasn't I invited to Sophie's wedding?" "It's her big day, honey. Don't make it about you." I laughed quietly, but it came out cracked. "About me, I've spent 10 years making sure everyone else's life worked. You can't even pick up the phone." Her sigh came through the line, long and heavy. "The last thing your sister needs is tension. Please, Emily, let's not do this right now." Then the line went dead. I stood there staring at my reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. The woman looking back at me wore a tailored navy suit and carried a title most people would kill for: Chief Operations Officer of one of the biggest hotel groups in the Midwest. Yet in that moment I felt 12 again, standing in our kitchen, watching Sophie spill milk across the counter, while Mom called her sweet and told me to clean it up. By the time the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I'd already made up my mind. I was going to that wedding. The drive to Lake Forest took less than an hour, but it felt longer. The highway shimmered with the late afternoon heat, and I kept catching glimpses of myself in the rearview mirror, wondering what exactly I was doing. I hadn't spoken to Sophie in months. The last time we'd been in the same room, she'd borrowed my credit card to book a photography studio, and then forgotten to pay me back. My mother had said, "She's your sister Em. She's just trying to find herself." Now apparently, she'd found herself a husband with deep pockets and a taste for grand gestures. When I reached the Azure Ridge Resort Valet, attendants in crisp uniforms lined the circular driveway, the kind of event that reeked of old money and curated perfection. A woman in a headset approached as I stepped out of my car. "Guest name, Emily Carter," I said. She scanned her tablet, frowned slightly, and glanced at a nearby server. He whispered something, and her expression changed. "Oh, you're with the event team, right?" I froze. "No, I'm not." But before I could finish, she handed me a tray of champagne flutes. "We're short-staffed in the West Hall. Just take these in. I looked down at the tray, at the bubbles trembling in the light. For one insane second, I thought about dropping it. But then I saw Sophie across the terrace, radiant in lace and sunlight, laughing at something Ethan whispered. She looked right past me. I carried the tray inside. The ballroom smelled like peonies and money. Gold chairs, a string quartet table so polished they reflected the chandelier light like water. I slipped the tray onto a side table, suddenly aware of every eye gliding over me. I didn't belong here, but I wasn't leaving. Sophie spotted me eventually. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. She broke away from a cluster of guests and walked over her heels, clicking against the marble. "Emily," she said, her tone syrup sweet. "Didn't expect to see you working tonight." "Working?" I almost laughed. I straightened my posture. "Nice place. How's married life treating you?" "It's been 6 hours," she said lightly, her friends giggling behind her. "You always were early to the cleanup crew." The girls laughed louder. My throat tightened, but I smiled anyway. "I'm not cleaning up this time." She tilted her head, pretending confusion. "Oh, right. You manage hotels now, don't you? Or is it motels? Hard to keep track." The laughter rippled again, soft and cruel. I saw my mother standing near the buffet table, pretending she didn't hear a thing. I leaned closer to Sophie and whispered, "You really think this will last?" Her smile didn't waver. "It doesn't have to. It just has to look good." She turned away before I could reply, her gown sweeping the floor like a declaration. I stood there surrounded by champagne and chandeliers and realized I felt nothing. No shame, no rage, just clarity. The waiter who'd mistaken me for staff passed by again. He nodded respectfully, now sensing something had shifted. I walked toward the terrace, the cool evening air brushing my face. Out by the water, the resort's glass facade reflected the setting sun, every surface burning gold. Somewhere inside, Ethan was toasting to family and forever. I knew better. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my business files, and opened the confidential folder labeled Ridge Holdings. The resort was listed under a private investment group I controlled. I stared at the document until the edges blurred. They thought I was invisible. They thought I'd clean up after them forever. A breeze caught the hem of my dress, cool against my skin. From the ballroom came the sound of laughter and applause. I turned toward the noise, my heart steady for the first time all day. Let them celebrate, I thought. The night was still young, and I had all the time in the world. When I finally left the ballroom, the laughter trailed behind me like an echo from another life. I drove back to the city with the radio off, the sound of tires on asphalt, filling the silence. The skyline came into view, glittering and indifferent. I parked in front of my condo and sat there for a while, staring at the lights reflected on the hood of my car. The humiliation from earlier was still fresh, but beneath it was something sharper: clarity. I made tea the same way I always did when I needed to think. The smell of mint filled the kitchen. My apartment was quiet, spotless, efficient. Everything in its place, unlike the home I grew up in. I leaned against the counter, thinking of my mother's voice, the way she used to call my name like a warning. "Emily, let your sister be. You're older, you should know better." It was the family rule. I cleaned up, I kept quiet, I made peace. I remembered being 8, standing in the backyard in Austin, while Sophie cried over a broken window. Mom had looked straight at me and said, "Say you did it. You're stronger." I said it because that was what love looked like in our house. Later, when Dad got sick, I worked double shifts at the diner while Sophie took art classes. When he died, Mom said Sophie needed to finish school, that I'd always find my own way. I did. I built a career brick by brick, while they built excuses. The memories pressed like weights on my chest. Somewhere between the wedding laughter and this empty apartment, I realized I'd been trained to stay silent. It wasn't just about keeping peace, it was survival. But tonight, silence felt like complicity. I took my laptop to the table and opened the company archives. The resort file was still listed under its holding group, Ridge Hospitality. I scrolled through contracts, dates, transactions. Everything looked normal until I noticed a signature. Mine, except I hadn't signed it. The date was 2 months ago, approving a renovation fund tied to the wedding event. My pulse quickened. Whoever had filed it used my old corporate credentials. The initials at the bottom matched the ones Sophie used to forge on permission slips in high school. SR. I called Michael my lawyer and oldest friend. He answered on the second ring, voice low and calm like always. Emily, it's late. I know. I need you to check something. I think someone used my name in a contract for Ridge Hospitality. He paused, the kind of pause that meant he was already taking it seriously. Send me the document. I'll cross-reference it first thing in the morning. No, I said, tonight. He sighed. All right. Forward it to my private email. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the contract. The more I looked, the clearer it became, the signatures, the timestamps, the matching vendor names. It wasn't just sloppiness. It was deliberate. Someone wanted the paper trail to point to me if things went wrong. Outside, rain started tapping the windows. I closed my eyes, listening. When we were kids, Dad used to say storms cleared the air, that you could breathe better afterward. But the storms in our house never cleared. They just left stains. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. I didn't want to open it, but I did anyway. Sophie says you showed up. That wasn't kind. She was embarrassed. Please don't make this worse. I typed 3 words and deleted them. Then I put the phone face down. The clock struck midnight. I pulled out the old family photo from my desk drawer. The 4 of us smiling in front of a Christmas tree, Sophie holding the puppy I'd saved up to buy her mom's, hand on her shoulder, not mine. I studied my younger self, the girl who still believed effort could earn affection. I wanted to tell her it doesn't work that way. The next morning, I drove to the Ridge corporate office before sunrise. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and new carpet. I hadn't been there in months. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. Ms. Carter, I thought you transferred to Denver. Just visiting, I said. I need access to the archives. She hesitated, then nodded. I walked through the empty halls, the hum of fluorescent lights above me. In the archive room, I searched through the physical files. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The resort's ownership documents had been reassigned last year. A trustee file labeled Family Estate Partnership was attached. The secondary contact listed wasn't me. It was my mother. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. So that was the plan. Transfer control quietly used my name to make it look legitimate, and when the paperwork cleared, hand everything to Sophie as a wedding gift. Michael called just as I left the building. His voice was clipped, professional. You were right. The signature's forged. They used your digital ID, but the system shows it came from an unregistered device. Can we trace it? We will, but you need to be careful. If they used your credentials, you're technically liable until we prove otherwise. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. They'd stolen from me before, but this time they'd done it on record. I drove without thinking past downtown, past the lakefront, until I reached the edge of the old neighborhood in Austin, where everything had started. The house still looked the same, beige siding porch light glowing even in daylight. I parked, but didn't get out. Through the window, I saw my mother moving around the kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, smiling. Maybe she was planning the next event. Maybe she was explaining why her eldest daughter wasn't family anymore. I thought about walking up demanding answers, but then I remembered her voice on the phone last night, calm, superior, certain she was untouchable. Instead, I drove away. The road curved around the lake, the sun breaking through gray clouds. For years, they'd taught me that love meant endurance, that family meant forgiveness without proof of remorse. But maybe love, real love, also meant boundaries. When I reached the city again, I felt something shift. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, deliberate. I pulled into my driveway and sat there a moment longer. The plan forming in my head wasn't revenge exactly. It was reclamation. I opened my phone, sent one message to Michael. Let's find out exactly what they took. The wind picked up outside, carrying the faint scent of rain. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled. It felt like a promise. A week later, the envelope arrived, thick and ivory with gold edges. The handwriting on the front was neat, practiced. Sophie Reynolds and Ethan Hale cordially invite you to celebrate their marriage. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of lilac perfume, the kind Sophie used to borrow from our mother when we were teenagers. For a moment I felt 12 again, standing in our shared bathroom, while she sprayed herself until the air turned sweet and suffocating. I left the invitation on the counter and walked away, but it followed me like a whisper. I told myself I had no reason to go. I wasn't family anymore. Then Michael called. His voice was brisk, practical. "I've reviewed the documents," he said. "Your name appears on multiple filings linked to Ridge Hospitality. Someone used your credentials to authorize vendor contracts for the wedding. Can they do that without me? Not legally, but it looks like they already have. You might need to be there to see exactly what they're using your name for." I hung up and looked at the invitation again. It glowed under the kitchen light like a dare. The following Saturday I drove back to Lake Forest. The sky was pale and restless, the kind of weather that couldn't decide between sun and rain. The resort loomed ahead, its glass facade catching the clouds. It had always looked perfect from a distance. Up close, perfection had cracks. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Staff carried floral arrangements taller than me, crystal vases shimmering under the lights. The scent of roses and expensive cologne clung to the air. Marco, the event manager, recognized me instantly. He had worked under my supervision years ago before I moved into corporate. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Ms. Carter." "I didn't expect. I'm just here to observe," I said quietly. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "The paperwork for this event has your name on it. It came through internal routing with your old signature. I tried to verify, but the system locked me out after. Show me." He led me to a small office off the catering hall, closing the door behind us. The binder on the desk was thick, labeled Reynolds Hale Wedding. My name appeared on half the page's authorization forms, payment approvals, vendor lists. Someone had even attached my old digital ID. The handwriting on the physical forms was familiar. Sophie's. I felt a flash of disbelief followed by a strange calm. I'd expected lies. I hadn't expected such arrogance. Marco watched me uneasy. "I didn't know if you wanted me to report this." "No," I said. "Keep this between us for now." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. When I left the office, the music from the rehearsal dinner carried through the hallway, soft piano and clinking glass. I slipped into the crowd unnoticed. Sophie was at the center of it all, laughing too loudly, her hand on Ethan's arm. He was tall, clean-cut, the kind of man who looked at everyone like they were a potential asset. When he saw me, confusion flickered, then recognition. He came over, charming smile already in place. "Emily Carter, Sophie's told me about you. All good things, I'm sure." He chuckled politely, eyes scanning the room even as he spoke to me. "We're grateful you could make it. This place is incredible. Your family has excellent taste." "Family," I repeated. Interesting word choice. Before he could respond, Sophie appeared at his side, perfume preceding her. She looped her arm through his. "Em, you came. How sweet." "You forgot to send my invitation," I said. "Oh, that. Mom must have missed it. Everything's been so hectic. You know how these things go." "Sure, I do." She smiled like she'd won something, then turned to Ethan. "Honey, we need to go over the contract for the venue payment after dinner." I caught the brief hesitation in his expression before he nodded. That was enough. I knew exactly what kind of arrangement they had. The rest of the evening passed in slow motion. Waiters glided between tables, photographers circled like bees. I watched Sophie pose with our mother near the cake display, their smiles identical and hollow. I recorded nothing with my phone, but every detail seared itself into memory. The vendor names, the timing, the coded looks between her and the accountant by the bar. Later, when the rehearsal ended and the guests began drifting out, I found Marco near the staff entrance. He handed me a folder quietly. "Copies," he said, "just in case." I took it without a word. The rain finally broke outside, soft at first, then heavier. I walked toward the parking lot, heels clicking against wet stone. My reflection wavered in the puddles, fragmented and strange. At my car, I paused. Through the ballroom windows, I could see Sophie dancing her dress, swirling like smoke, our mother clapping along. It should have hurt. Instead, it felt distant, like watching strangers reenact a story I'd already outgrown. I opened the folder under the car's dome light. Page after page bore my name, my signature, my supposed consent. At the bottom of one form, Sophie had written a note to the manager. "Please expedite. The bride's sister approves." Thunder rumbled again, closer this time. I closed the folder and placed it on the passenger seat. If they wanted a performance, they'd chosen the wrong stage. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proof. About taking back what had always been mine. The rain hammered the windshield, blurring the world outside. I started the engine, feeling the weight of what I held beside me. By morning, I would know exactly how deep this went. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It steadied me. By morning, I had everything printed, labeled, and sealed in a folder thick enough to change the course of a life. Michael confirmed what I already suspected. The contracts tied to Ridge Hospitality and the wedding event were fraudulent, filed through a shell account connected to my mother. Sophie had been listed as secondary trustee. I stared at the emails until the words blurred, then shut my laptop. The wedding was set for that evening. If they wanted a spectacle, they would get one. By the time I reached the resort, the sun was sinking behind the lake, painting the water with streaks of copper and gold. Guests in tuxedos and sequined gowns glided past the fountains, laughter floating like perfume. The ballroom glowed through the glass facade chandeliers, scattering light across the marble floors. I stood for a moment at the entrance, collecting myself. Inside, everything was perfect. The string quartet played Sinatra. The tables shimmered with silverware, and the scent of peonies filled the air. I followed a hostess to my seat, only to find it tucked behind a service door leading to the kitchen. I smiled at the irony. The perfect seat for the family's invisible daughter. Mom approached soon after, her blue silk dress gleaming under the chandeliers. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder. "Everyone has their place, sweetheart," she said quietly. "Just enjoy the evening." I looked up at her, noting the diamond earrings she wore, the same ones Dad had bought for me the year I graduated college. I didn't answer. She lingered for a second, then drifted away like a queen moving to her throne. The dinner began with speeches. Ethan thanked everyone for coming, his charm polished, his smile rehearsed. Then Sophie stood radiant in her white gown, eyes sparkling with satisfaction. She raised her glass. "To family, to new beginnings, and to the people who make everything possible." She paused, looking straight at me. "Especially those who know how to clean up other people's messes." Laughter rippled through the room. Even the photographer smirked. My mother laughed softly, covering her mouth as if it were harmless fun. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression calm. Across the room, I saw Marco standing near the catering table. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He saw what was happening, and his jaw clenched. A minute later, he appeared beside me, pretending to refill my water. "Do you want me to say something?" he murmured. "Not yet," I said. "Wait for my cue." He nodded, retreating into the shadows of the service door. I turned my attention back to the stage. Sophie and Ethan were cutting the cake now, the crowd cheering, phones raised. The lights dimmed, soft music playing. I took out my phone under the table and began forwarding the files to Michael, each document attached with timestamps, vendor records, and screenshots from the resort system. My heart beat steady. It wasn't rage anymore. It was precision. Halfway through dessert, Ethan left the table to speak to one of the investors, a tall man in a gray suit I recognized from the company's acquisition meetings. Their voices were low, urgent. I caught pieces of their conversation. Liquidation, transfer, immediate approval. My name again. I slipped out quietly and followed them toward the side corridor where the administrative offices were located. The hall was empty, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. They stopped outside a glass office, papers spread across the desk. "She won't know," Ethan was saying. "By the time the ownership records update, will already be clear. And what if she finds out the investor asked?" He smiled. "She's family. She's always been loyal to a fault." I leaned against the wall, hands trembling slightly, and took a photo of the documents before stepping back into the ballroom. The music had shifted to something upbeat now, guests laughing oblivious. Marco caught my eye again, a silent question. I shook my head. Not yet. The timing had to be right. Sophie approached, then a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked flushed and euphoric, the perfect bride. You look tense, Em. Don't tell me you're still upset about earlier. It was just a joke. Of course, I said. You've always had a great sense of humor. She laughed, unaware of the danger surrounding her. Ethan waved her over, and she drifted back into his orbit, still smiling. I watched them dance under the chandeliers, her train sweeping across the marble floor like smoke. When the music slowed, Marco moved beside me again. The servers are asking if they should bring out the final toast, he said. Do it, I replied. Then be ready to play the video. He blinked. The video? Check your inbox. He walked away, already pulling out his phone. Moments later, the lights dimmed for the toast. Sophie and Ethan stood together on stage, glasses raised. To love, she began. To family, he echoed. The screen behind them flickered to life. At first, it showed a slideshow of their engagement photos, soft music swelling. Then the image changed. The guests gasped. On screen appeared the scanned contracts bearing my name, followed by the audio recording from earlier that evening, Ethan's voice clear as glass. She won't know. She's family. She's loyal to a fault. For a moment, the room was frozen. Then whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras flashed. Sophie's face went white. Ethan's expression hardened into panic. Marco cut the feed just as security moved toward the front. The silence that followed was thick and electric. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked past the tables. Nobody tried to stop me. Sophie's eyes followed me wide with shock tears already forming. My mother sat motionless, a hand over her mouth. Outside, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain and champagne. I could still hear the confusion inside the rising voices, the collapse of their perfect night. I walked to my car without looking back. The rain had started again, gentle this time, glimmering under the streetlights. I opened the door, slipped inside, and checked my phone. A message from Michael was waiting. Got everything. Sit tight. I exhaled slowly. The game had shifted. Somewhere behind me, thunder rolled across the lake, low and distant. It didn't sound like a warning anymore. It sounded like applause. The storm had died down by morning, but the air still carried that charged metallic smell, like something waiting to happen. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophie's face frozen in shock under the chandelier light, Ethan's expression shifting from confusion to fear. I brewed coffee, the kind that tasted like smoke, and sat at my kitchen table watching rain streak the windows. My phone buzzed at 8. It was Marco. They're back here, he said quietly. Everyone's pretending nothing happened. But there's talk. You should come. I hesitated, then grabbed my coat. By the time I reached the resort, the parking lot was full again. Photographers milled about like vultures circling a carcass. Inside staff were rearranging decorations, smoothing linens, preparing for a second round of festivities. Sophie's perfect wedding couldn't end in scandal, not if my mother could help it. I found Marco near the ballroom doors, clipboard in hand. His tie was loosened, his eyes tired. He nodded toward the stage. They're demanding the final vendor payments. Ethan says the accounts are frozen. He wants someone to authorize the release. I glanced toward the crowd. Sophie stood beside Ethan, her makeup redone, her smile brittle. Mom hovered nearby, whispering to guests that last night was just a technical glitch. A chill ran through me. Then I heard Marco's voice echo across the room. Ms. Carter, we still need your signature for the settlement form. The music stuttered. Conversation stopped. Every head turned toward me. For a second, I almost smiled. I walked to the front of the room, heels clicking against the marble floor. Sophie's mouth parted, color draining from her face. Mom blinked, confused. I took the pen, Marco offered, looked up at him, and said loud enough for the microphones to catch it. I'll sign as managing partner of Ridge Holdings, the owner of this property. The silence that followed was absolute. Then a wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She owns the place." Sophie's smile cracked. "That's not possible," she said. "It's not only possible," I replied. "It's legal. The documents you filed under my name were flagged months ago. The board transferred full ownership to my firm before you even booked the venue." Ethan stepped forward, his composure slipping. "You can't be serious. We've already settled everything with your family." "You settled nothing," I said. "You forged my authorization to use this space. I should charge you double." The reporters at the back began taking pictures. Sophie's hands trembled as she clutched her champagne glass. Mom tried to recover, smiling stiffly. "Emily, let's not do this here. We can talk privately." I met her eyes. "We've been private for too long." Marco cleared his throat and announced, "Payments for today's event are suspended pending verification. Thank you for your patience." The band stopped playing. A few guests slipped out quietly. I turned to leave, but Ethan followed me into the corridor. His voice was calm, practiced. "You've made your point," he said. "Now let's discuss how we can make this beneficial for both of us." I stopped walking. "Beneficial." He leaned closer, lowering his tone. "You're obviously intelligent. We could form a partnership, expand the Ridge brand. There's profit in alliances, Emily." I looked at him, at his perfect suit, his perfect smile, and saw what Sophie couldn't, a man who built empires out of other people's weaknesses. I told him softly, "I don't invest in marriages disguised as business deals." His smile faltered. "Then good luck cleaning up the mess you just made," he said, and walked away. Outside the ballroom, Marco caught up with me. His voice was a whisper. "That was bold." "It was overdue," I said. He nodded. "What now?" "Now I finish what they started." That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and compiled everything. The forged signatures, the recordings, the contracts Ethan had tried to bury. I attached them all to a single encrypted file and sent it to Michael. His reply came within minutes. "Received. We'll proceed first thing Monday. Stay low." I sat back, exhaustion spreading through me, but underneath it was something sharper, steadier: control. For years I had let them decide who I was, the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible daughter. Now the narrative belonged to me. Rain began again outside, soft against the glass. I stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur in the downpour. Somewhere, Ethan and Sophie were probably arguing, their polished world cracking around them. I thought about my mother, about the look in her eyes when I said, "Owner." Not anger, not even disbelief. Fear. She knew what it meant. Everything they'd built on my back was collapsing. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won it, Red. But this isn't over." No name, no signature, just the echo of arrogance. I deleted it, shut off the light, and let the rain drown the city. Tomorrow, I would start the cleanup. And for once, it wouldn't be mine. The next morning started with a phone call that confirmed what I already feared. Michael's voice came through the line, steady but tense. "Emily, it's worse than we thought. They didn't just forge your signature for the venue. They used your information to secure a $500,000 line of credit. The documents list you as guarantor." For a second, I couldn't speak. My mind tried to catch up with the words. $500,000. My name. My liability. I finally said, "Find out which bank approved it." "Already done," he replied. "Midstate Financial. The loan was transferred into a joint account under your mother's estate and Sophie's company. I'm filing a fraud notice today." I hung up my hand, shaking slightly. The arrogance of it all was almost breathtaking. They had built their entire world on borrowed names, and now it was cracking apart. By noon, the story had started to leak. Someone at the resort, probably a staff member who'd seen the contracts, tipped off a reporter. My phone lit up with messages from colleagues, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The headline read, "Socialite couple under investigation for financial misconduct." There was a photo of Sophie and Ethan smiling on the resort balcony, framed by the words, "Lavish wedding legal trouble." Michael called again. "The bank froze the account," he said. Ethan tried to withdraw funds this morning, but compliance flagged the transaction. He's furious. Good, I said quietly. Let him be. But the chaos didn't stop there. That afternoon, a different rumor started spreading through social media. A video clip of Ethan with his assistant Claire Jennings outside a downtown hotel. The date stamp was from 2 weeks before the wedding. It spread faster than even I expected. I watched the clip in silence, the two of them laughing, her hand brushing his arm. The comments exploded. People dissected every frame, every glance. By evening, Ethan's PR team issued a statement denying any inappropriate relationship. No one believed it. Then came the second blow. Sophie's pregnancy announcement. A perfectly staged photo on her private account captioned, "Our little miracle arriving this fall." It might have worked if I hadn't already seen the hospital record buried in the resort's medical insurance claims. The ultrasound date didn't match Ethan's travel schedule. He had been in Europe on business 3 months earlier. I called Michael again. "She's pregnant." There was a pause. "Does that matter legally?" "No," I said, "but it might matter publicly." That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I got another call. Unknown number. I answered, expecting a reporter. It was Sophie. Her voice was trembling, fragile in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. "Em, please don't do this. Do what I asked. You're feeding the press. You're trying to ruin me." I took a deep breath. "I haven't spoken to a single reporter. Everything happening is a consequence of your own actions." She started crying. "You don't understand. Mom doesn't know about the loan about the baby. She thinks Ethan's perfect. If she finds out, it'll destroy her. Please just let me fix it." I almost laughed. Fix it. That word had followed me my entire life. "You've been fixing your mistakes with other people's money for years," I said. "Maybe it's time you live with them instead." Her voice cracked. "I'm begging you, Em. Keep it quiet." Silence stretched between us. I thought of my father's face, the way he used to look at me when I told him I could handle things, the weight of his trust. Finally, I said, "The truth doesn't need my permission." She sobbed. Then the line went dead. I sat for a long time after that, staring out at the wet streets. Cars hissed past their headlights, reflected in the puddles. I thought about how easy it had been for them to manipulate the system, to treat laws like suggestions, but not this time. The next morning, I walked into the State Financial Bureau and filed a formal complaint. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, reviewed my paperwork and nodded slowly. "You've done the right thing," she said. "It'll take time, but they won't get away with it." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It felt wrong, almost too bright for what was happening. By afternoon, the investigation was official. Agents contacted the bank, seized documents, and interviewed staff at Ridge. Marco texted me that federal auditors were on site asking for Ethan. By evening, the media frenzy had doubled. New headlines paired Sophie's glowing maternity photos with Ethan's affair scandal. The world that had once revolved around their image of perfection was now feeding on its collapse. Mom called it sunset. Her voice was clipped, furious. "What have you done? Nothing you didn't start," I said. "You've humiliated this family." "No," I corrected. "I've just stopped hiding what you already did." The line went silent for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost pleading. "Emily, please. She's your sister." "So was I said, and ended the call. That night I emailed Michael one final message. "Send everything to the authorities. No more delays." He replied with a single word. "Done." I closed my laptop and looked out the window again. The city was quiet, washed clean after the storm. Somewhere Sophie was probably curled up in her designer bedroom, realizing for the first time that the truth could hurt worse than exposure. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was full, deliberate, like the moment before dawn when the world holds its breath. I poured myself a glass of water, set it on the counter, and whispered to no one, "It's not revenge, it's balance." Then I turned off the light. Outside, the night hummed with the faint promise of consequence. 3 months passed before the headlines finally reached me. I was drinking coffee at a cafe downtown when the TV above the counter flickered to a breaking news banner. The anchor's voice was steady professional. Authorities confirmed that Ethan Hale had been taken into custody for money laundering and securities fraud. His company's accounts had been frozen. His wife, socialite Sophie Reynolds, was under investigation for financial conspiracy tied to the Azure Ridge Resort. I set down my cup, the porcelain rattling softly against the saucer. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars passed, people laughed, baristas called out orders. But inside me something loosened. For years I had been the quiet one, the one they could count on to keep things tidy. Now the mess was theirs alone. By afternoon, every news outlet had the story. Old footage from the wedding replayed endlessly, Sophie smiling under the chandeliers toasting to family, her voice dripping with pride. Then came the clip of her speech, the one that had gone viral months ago. The line that started it all. Especially those who know how to clean up other people's messes. The internet had turned it into a punchline. Comment sections overflowed with sarcasm. The bride who mocked her sister now accused of theft. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice has its own rhythm, and it rarely needs applause. The call from my mother came 2 days later. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of the authority it once carried. Emily. I don't know what to do. They came to the house this morning. They're saying I falsified documents. Did you? I asked. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she whispered, I only signed what Sophie gave me. I thought it was harmless. Nothing about this was harmless, I said. You signed under my name. She began to cry, soft and helpless. I felt something like pity, but it faded quickly. Choices have consequences, even for mothers who never thought the rules applied to them. A week later, the formal charges were announced. Ethan was held without bail, facing a decade of prison time. Sophie was ordered to appear before a federal court in Chicago. My mother was listed as a cooperating witness charged with forgery, but released under supervision. The day of Sophie's hearing, I arrived early. The courthouse was cold, the air heavy with disinfectant and murmurs. Reporters clustered outside the entrance, microphones flashing. When Sophie finally appeared, she looked smaller than I remembered. Her expensive suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face. She saw me as she passed through security. For a moment she stopped, then she walked over, ignoring the cameras. Her voice trembled. You came. I nodded. I needed to see this end. Tears welled in her eyes. I lost everything, Em. The house, the cars, even Ethan. He won't answer my calls. You didn't lose them, I said quietly. You never owned them. Her lips trembled. They said if I cooperate, I can avoid jail time, but I have to sign a full confession. Then sign it. She looked at me like she was searching for mercy. Do you hate me that much? I shook my head. Hate takes effort. I'm done spending energy on you. The bailiff called her name, and she turned toward the courtroom. For a second, I thought she might collapse, but she straightened her shoulders and walked through the doors. I followed, sitting near the back, as the proceedings began. The prosecutor read the charges, the judge asked routine questions, and Sophie answered in a quiet, flat voice. When they handed her the statement of admission, she signed without hesitation. The pen didn't shake. Maybe for the first time she understood what accountability looked like. When it was over, she turned back to me. I expected anger, maybe bitterness. Instead, she just looked tired. I'll plead guilty, she said softly. They said it might help Mom. It will, I told her. She nodded, and for the briefest moment her expression softened into something that almost resembled the girl I once knew. Then the guards led her away. Outside, the crowd erupted into questions, flashes, noise. I pushed through, quietly ignoring them. Michael met me on the steps, a folder in his hand. The civil suit is officially settled, he said. You can withdraw your claim. I'll do it, I said. On one condition. He raised an eyebrow. She has to sign the affidavit admitting she used my identity. It's not about punishment. It's about truth on record. He nodded. I'll make it happen. That evening, Sophie met me in a small room at the county detention center. Her wrists were bare now, the diamond ring gone. She stared at the form on the table, then at me. "You're really doing this?" "Yes. If you sign it, I'll request to drop the civil charges. You'll still face federal sentencing, but it might reduce the time." Her hand hovered over the paper. "What if I don't?" "Then you'll face it all alone." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she picked up the pen. The sound of it scratching against paper was soft but final. When she finished, she pushed the page toward me. Her eyes filled again. "I thought I was winning," she said. "You were just borrowing what wasn't yours." I folded the paper, stood up, and left. The guard opened the door, and the echo of it closing behind me sounded like an ending. Outside, dusk was settling over the city, painting the courthouse windows in shades of amber and gray. People hurried past their lives untouched by the wreckage of ours. I took a breath that felt deeper than any in years. The victory didn't taste sweet, not exactly. It tasted clean. For the first time since that wedding, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even relieved. I was free. As I walked down the steps, a cool wind rose from the river, tugging at my coat. Somewhere behind me, the courthouse bells struck 5 each note, fading into the evening like a heartbeat finally slowing down. Tomorrow the headlines would move on to something new. But tonight, I let the quiet settle around me. Justice had spoken, and I no longer needed to. A year later, the world felt softer somehow. The noise had faded, the headlines replaced by fresher scandals, but what remained was quiet and real. Azure Ridge no longer existed. The sign outside the gates now read, "The Haven Foundation," letters, carved in brushed steel and sunlight. It had taken months of paperwork, construction, and long nights to rebuild the place, not as a resort, but as a refuge. Women arrived every week with stories that echoed pieces of my own voices, bruised but not broken. I walked through the lobby one morning, watching volunteers hang framed photographs of the new residents planting gardens by the lake. The air smelled of lavender and fresh paint. It no longer reeked of money and deceit. This building finally belonged to something worth keeping. Michael visited often, still the same calm presence, though a little grayer around the temples. He brought updates about Sophie's case from time to time, though I never asked. The last I heard, she had completed her sentence and moved to Oregon. I didn't expect to hear from her again. Then one rainy afternoon, a small envelope arrived at my office. The handwriting was familiar, but steadier than before. I read it slowly. She wrote that she was working at a bakery in Portland, raising her baby on her own, trying to build a life without shortcuts. She said she thought of me every day when she saw the sunrise over the river, because it reminded her that no one gets to borrow light forever. At the end, she thanked me not for forgiveness, but for forcing her to face what she had done. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer beneath my desk. Mom wrote too, though her words came through a social worker from a financial recovery program. She was taking classes on debt management, learning how to live within limits. The letter was short, almost businesslike, but she included a photograph of Dad, one I hadn't seen in years. On the back, she'd written, "He would have been proud of you." I wasn't sure if I believed that, but I kept it anyway. Sometimes late at night, when the offices were empty, I walked the hallways of the Haven. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the lake, the same one where Sophie had said her vows. The water glittered beneath the moon, peaceful now. It amazed me how something that once held so much pain could also hold so much calm. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Donations came in quietly, often from women who'd never met me, but had read the story somewhere online. They didn't know the details, only that a sister once called another the Maid, and that somehow the Maid had turned the insult into purpose. We started new programs housing legal aid job training. The first resident to graduate found work as a property manager in Denver. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "You gave me back my name." One afternoon, a local news crew came to film a segment about the foundation. The reporter was young, eager eyes bright with curiosity. She asked if I would sit for a short interview. I agreed, though cameras still made me uneasy. We sat by the window, the lake shimmering behind us. She asked about the past, about how the idea for the haven began. I chose my words carefully. It began with humiliation, I said. But pain has a strange way of teaching clarity. They once called me the Maid. Maybe I was. Because I cleaned up what was left behind. She smiled softly. That's quite a quote. It's just the truth, I replied. After the crew left, the sun began to set, flooding the lobby with gold. The plaque by the entrance caught the light. Founder Emily Carter. My name in simple letters, nothing more. For years, I'd wanted recognition, validation, proof that I mattered. But standing there watching the sunlight play across the metal, I realized the name didn't matter as much as the work it stood for. I stepped outside. The air was warm, thick with the scent of cut grass. Across the street, children played by the fountain, their laughter carrying through the evening. The world felt balanced, as if it had exhaled with me. A car pulled up and Michael stepped out holding 2 coffees. He handed me one and smiled. "You've done good," he said. I took a sip, watching the last of the sun sink into the water. Maybe I said, or maybe I just stopped doing bad. He laughed quietly. Either way, it suits you. We stood there in companionable silence, the kind that no longer felt empty. Later, after he left, I walked down to the pier. The water lapped gently against the wood. I could still see faint reflections of the old resort sign, its letters buried beneath the new one. For a moment, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who cleaned up after everyone else, who believed silence was love. I wanted to tell her that silence could also be strength, that one day she would stand here and breathe without fear. The wind lifted, carrying the faint scent of rain again, just like that first night. I looked up at the sky, streaked with pink and gray, and felt something close to peace, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that fills the spaces you didn't know were empty. Behind me, the lights of the haven glowed against the dusk. Inside, women laughed, music played softly, and life kept moving forward. I stayed a moment longer, letting the sound wash over me, then turned to go back inside. The past no longer had a claim on me. It had become what it was always meant to be, the foundation for something better.